My sister stole my inheritance and blew it all on a pyramid scheme. When she came crawling back for money, I offered her a deal she'll never forget. Let me start by diving deeper into the dynamics between Claire and me. Growing up, our parents had always tried to maintain a sense of fairness between us, but life has a way of making things messy. Claire was always the favorite. I'm not saying this out of bitterness, it's just the way things were. She had this carefree, infectious personality that everyone loved. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly make everyone laugh, while I was always more reserved, more cautious. I think that's part of why my parents gave her more slack when it came to her mistakes. They thought she would figure things out eventually. In high school, Claire was the life of the party. I was the one who stayed home to finish my homework and helped out around the house. Claire barely scraped by with passing grades and seemed to care more about her social life than her future. While I was applying for scholarships and trying to get into a good college, Claire was talking about running away to California to become an actress or a singer, or whatever her latest dream of the week was. My parents were worried, but they never really tried to stop her. I think they thought she'd grow out of it. She didn't. After high school, Claire did move to California for a while, chasing some vague notion of fame. She got a job as a waitress, tried auditioning for a few acting gigs, and eventually gave up when reality set in. I had already predicted this would happen, and when she came back home a year later, broke and embarrassed, I felt for her, but part of me also felt vindicated. While Claire was off living her dream, I had stayed behind, working my way through college, studying late nights, and hustling to make something of myself. That pattern set the tone for the next several years. Claire would come up with some new scheme or opportunity, a business venture, a move to a new city, a plan to become an entrepreneur, and every single time, it would fail. She'd return home, broke, living with our parents, and I'd be there, watching from the sidelines as she cleaned up the mess. I grew increasingly frustrated with her and, honestly, with our parents for not holding her accountable. They'd always open their doors, give her a place to stay, and offer emotional support, while I was expected to stand on my own 2 feet without a handout. Over time, Claire and I grew apart. I moved away, got a steady job, and built a stable life for myself. I wasn't rich, but I was doing okay. Meanwhile, Claire seemed to be stuck in this cycle of self-sabotage. She couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months, always talking about the next big thing that was going to save her from her financial troubles. Our parents continued to enable her, and it drove me crazy. When our dad passed away, it was a wake-up call for both of us. I grieved deeply, while Claire seemed to throw herself into distractions. She showed up late to the funeral, looking disheveled, and didn't stay long afterward. I tried to reach out to her during that time, but it was like she was in her own world. I think she was struggling with guilt. She hadn't been around much during Dad's illness, while I had been by his side, helping Mom care for him. But instead of dealing with those emotions, Claire just ran. When Mom passed a couple of years later, it was devastating. Mom and I had grown closer after Dad's death, and losing her felt like I had lost my last anchor to the past. Claire, on the other hand, had barely been in touch with Mom in those final years. She was too busy with her latest job or boyfriend, always on the move, always distracted. When I saw her at the funeral, she looked like a stranger to me. We exchanged a few words, but it was clear we were living in 2 completely different worlds. That's why, when we sat down for the reading of the will and I found out Claire was the executor of the estate, I was shocked. I couldn't understand why Mom had chosen her. I mean, I had been the responsible one, the one who had been there for Mom in her final years. Claire had barely been around, and yet, she was trusted with this huge responsibility. Looking back, I think Mom hoped that giving Claire this role would force her to grow up. Maybe she thought that managing the estate would be a turning point for Claire, a chance for her to finally step up and prove she could handle responsibility. It didn't work out that way. At first, like I mentioned earlier, I gave Claire the benefit of the doubt. She assured me that everything was under control and that the process would just take a little time. I tried to be patient, tried to trust that she would do the right thing, but as the months went by and I heard nothing, my suspicions grew. I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Claire would mention vague details about the estate, but when I asked specific questions, she would deflect or change the subject. She was always too busy to meet up in person to go over the paperwork, claiming she had work commitments or personal issues to deal with. I started to get a sinking feeling that something wasn't right, but I didn't want to believe that my own sister would take advantage of me. I kept holding on to the hope that maybe she was just overwhelmed or distracted, not malicious. When I finally got that call from the lawyer, confirming my worst fears, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Claire had taken her half of the money without telling me, and she had done it months ago. Worse, she had let the estate dwindle down to almost nothing before I even got my share. I felt completely betrayed. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about our mother's legacy, and about the fact that Claire had once again put her own selfish needs above everything else. Confronting her was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but I was shaking with anger. When she finally admitted what she had done, that she had invested in some pyramid scheme, thinking it would be a quick way to double her money, I lost it. I yelled, I cried, and I told her exactly what I thought of her. All the frustration and resentment I had been holding on to for years came pouring out in that moment. I told her she was a failure, that she had let everyone down, and that I never wanted to see her again. I don't know if Claire fully understood the depth of the pain she had caused me. She cried, too, of course, and begged for forgiveness. She said she was sorry, that she had made a mistake, but at that point, I was too angry to listen. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. For the next few months, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I focused on my job, my friends, and my own life. I didn't want anything to do with Claire. I figured I'd wash my hands of the whole mess, and that would be that. But then came the call. The one where Claire was crying and begging for help, telling me she was about to be evicted, that she had nowhere else to turn. It was like a scene out of a bad movie, the irresponsible sibling, once again, asking the responsible one to bail her out. I wanted to hang up the phone, to tell her that this was her problem, not mine, but there was a part of me that just couldn't do it. Despite everything, she was still my sister, and some small part of me still cared. So I offered her the deal. I thought I was being clever, drawing up that contract with all the strict terms. It was my way of helping her without really helping her, if that makes sense. I was protecting myself, ensuring that if she screwed up again, I wouldn't be the one left holding the bag. It was a cold, calculated move, but at the time, it felt like the only way I could give her any help without getting hurt again. When Claire defaulted on the loan and invested in that ridiculous cryptocurrency scam, I was almost numb to it. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed. I followed through on my promise and took her to court. By that point, I didn't even care about the money anymore, it was the principle of the thing. Claire needed to face the consequences of her actions, and I needed to protect myself from her ever taking advantage of me again. The court ruling was bittersweet. On one hand, I got my money back, but on the other hand, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Watching her lose her wages to garnishment, knowing she was struggling just to get by, wasn't satisfying. It just felt sad. Our parents had worked so hard to provide for us, and this was how their legacy was playing out, with one daughter taking the other to court over money. For a long time, I didn't think about Claire at all. I moved on with my life and tried to forget about her. Every once in a while, I'd hear a rumor from a mutual acquaintance about how she was doing, but I didn't. Ask for details. I figured she was still chasing after get-rich-quick schemes and failing, just like she always had. I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, she was no longer a part of my life. Then came the letter. I debated for days whether to open it or just throw it away. After everything that had happened, I didn't want to be dragged back into her drama. But curiosity got the better of me, and I'm glad it did. Reading Claire's letter was like hearing from a completely different person. She didn't make excuses or try to justify her actions. She just apologized, over and over again, for everything she had done. She admitted that she had been reckless, selfish, and irresponsible, and that she had hurt me in ways she hadn't fully understood at the time. She talked about hitting rock bottom after the court case, losing her apartment, her friends, and even her sense of self-worth. She said that going to therapy and joining a support group for compulsive gamblers had been a turning point for her, and that she was finally starting to take control of her life. I didn't know what to believe. Claire had promised to change so many times before, and she had never followed through. But something about this letter felt different. It was raw, honest, and devoid of the usual theatrics. For the first time, it seemed like Claire was really taking responsibility for her actions. I decided to respond, but I kept it brief. I acknowledged her apology and said I was glad she was getting help, but I didn't offer any promises about rebuilding our relationship. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. When Claire called me a few days later, I was nervous. I didn't know if I was ready to hear her voice again, but I picked up the phone. The conversation was awkward at first, but Claire was different. She wasn't defensive or trying to shift the blame. She was humble, almost timid. She told me more about her therapy sessions, how she was learning to break her destructive patterns, and how she had started to rebuild her life from the ground up. We've had a few more conversations since then, and while I'm still cautious, I'm beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, Claire really is changing. It's going to take time, and a lot of work, but for the first time in years, I feel like there's a sliver of hope. Maybe we'll never go back to being close, but at least there's a chance we can have some kind of relationship again. I'm taking things one day at a time, and I'm still figuring out how much of myself I'm willing to open up to her. But I'm also trying to remember that people can change, even if it takes them hitting rock bottom to do it. Only time will tell if Claire's newfound sense of responsibility will last, but for now, I'm willing to give her a chance to prove herself. If nothing else, this entire experience has taught me the importance of boundaries and self-preservation. I've learned that it's okay to love someone from a distance, to protect yourself from their chaos, while still holding space for the possibility that they can grow. It's a delicate balance, but I'm trying to navigate it as best as I can. Thanks for listening to my story, and for all the support and advice you've given me along the way. I'll keep you updated if anything changes, but for now, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. Final update. It's been about 6 months since my last post, and I thought I'd share a final update on my situation with Claire. I know many of you have been following this roller coaster of a story, and some of you have been wondering whether or not Claire and I ever managed to mend things. After our tentative reconnection, Claire and I continued to have occasional conversations. At first, they were infrequent, with both of us treading carefully. I wasn't sure how much trust I could give her, and she seemed to understand that. Over time, though, I could tell that she was really making an effort to turn things around. She stuck with her therapy and her support group and even found a steady job working for a local nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her stability, which was something she had desperately needed for a long time. One of the biggest changes I've noticed in Claire is that she no longer talks about chasing the next big thing. For the first time in her life, she seems content with just working hard, paying her bills, and living within her means. It's a huge shift from the impulsive, reckless person I used to know, and while I'm still cautious, I've started to believe that she might truly be changing for the better. A few weeks ago, Claire asked if we could meet in person. I'll admit, I was nervous. We hadn't seen each other face to face since the court case, and I wasn't sure what it would be like to be in the same room after everything that had happened. But I agreed, and we met for coffee at a quiet cafe in town. When I saw her, I was surprised by how different she looked. Gone was the frantic, disheveled Claire I had grown used to. She seemed more grounded, more at peace with herself. We talked for hours, and while we didn't dive too deep into the past, we touched on it enough to acknowledge the hurt that was still there. She apologized again, and this time, it felt real. I could tell she wasn't just saying the words, she truly meant them. We're not back to being close siblings, but we're building something new, something based on mutual respect and understanding. It's slow, and it's not perfect, but it feels genuine. I still have my guard up, and I think that's healthy. But I'm also allowing myself to let go of some of the anger I've been holding on to for so long. I don't know what the future holds for our relationship, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Claire has a long road ahead of her, and I'm not going to rush into anything. For now, though, I'm proud of the progress we've made, both separately and together. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. It's meant more to me than I can express. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that healing, whether in relationships or within yourself, takes time. And that's okay.